Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. I am your host, Terry. So I just dropped a load off in Lexington, South Carolina, and it's the drop and hook, but there was no hooking to be done. So I sent a message saying, hey, there's nothing there. So there's at the same exit I got off of, there's Love's here, so I bobtailed over here. I'm parked, and we'll see. I got some time left on my clock, but my 70-hour clock has been very depleted lately, so we'll see what happens. So a lot going on today. Let's get right to it. Let's talk some history. So it's June 30th today. And today is an important day. It's actually the 160th, if my math is right, anniversary of June 30th, 1863. Now, if you know anything about U.S. history, you know that the largest battle to ever take place on the North American continent was getting ready to happen on this day 160 years ago. So let's talk about some stuff that happened before the actual Battle of Gettysburg starts on the 1st around 5 a.m. And we'll talk about a couple of things and decisions that were made that would have a lot of import later on, right? Life's all about decisions and consequences, and the Battle of Gettysburg illustrates that as well as any human endeavor. So on the 30th, I'll back up just a little bit. On June 27th, Henry Halleck, who was the chief of staff of the Union Army, and I might have his title wrong, but that's basically what he was. He was an Army bureaucrat. He was a general, worked in Washington, D.C., talked to Lincoln every day, okay, and probably Secretary of War Edwin Stanton every day. So Halleck and Joseph Hooker, who was the Army of the Potomac commanding general, they have an argument about the defense of Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. And Hooker kind of like, what's the term I want to use? Writing checks that his body can't cash, basically. His mouth writing checks that his body can't cash. He offers, he's like, well, hey, if you disagree with me, then I'll resign. So Lincoln and Halleck immediately take him up on his offer and relieve him of command. They accept his resignation, right? And on the 28th of June, very early in the morning, like 2 o'clock in the morning, a messenger comes to General George Gordon Meade's tent. Meade, I think at the time, was the 5th Corps commander. And he wakes Meade up, and Meade actually wasn't sure what was going on. He wasn't sure if he did something wrong and was being placed under arrest. I guess this dude was a general. He was a major general, and he was still worried about if he made a mistake and they were going to arrest him for it. And they're like, no, you're the new commander of the Army of the Potomac. So Meade immediately gets to work, but he doesn't really know what plans Hooker had. And by this time, the Confederates, the Army of Northern Virginia, they'd invaded Pennsylvania. Lee had issued this General Order number 72 earlier, and he said, I don't want you to do anything to harm the civilian populace. Well, harm is kind of one of those ambiguous terms, because if stealing, every single thing that somebody has of value and then giving them worthless Confederate specie or IOUs from the Confederate government is not harming them, then I guess no harm was done. But like threatening to burn down the city of York, Pennsylvania, unless they were, the ransom was paid, stealing thousands of horses, butchering cows, tearing up fields, tearing down fences to burn, to cook the cows they stole and slaughtered. The list goes on, even to the point of like taking food out of people's larders, you know, in their kitchens, in their root cellars. You know, and I will say this, central Pennsylvania was, and it does remain, a very fertile area that produces a fair amount of food. And there's lots and lots of horses there. Where I lived was only a few miles from the battlefield when I lived in Pennsylvania, and there was one of the largest standard-bred horse farms. Well, I think it is the largest standard-bred horse farm in the world, located like basically right there in Hanover, PA. And that farm was there when the Civil War broke out. So anyway, getting back to the battle, the Confederates are all over central Pennsylvania, and the Union Army is you know, trying to track them down. The Union Army's basically chasing them. And one of the things that Meade does on the 30th is he issues an order for all of his corps to converge on the town of Gettysburg. It wasn't known that there would be a battle there yet, but he felt like that was a central point and it would be a good place to mass all his forces. However, the other thing he does is he issues what is called the Pipe Creek Memorandum, or, you know, order. And basically there's a creek in Carroll County, Maryland. And by the way, on the 30th, Meade moves his headquarters up to Taneytown, Maryland, right? And in Taneytown, there was a road that went directly to Gettysburg, known as the Taneytown Pike. So he had been in Frederick, Maryland, just to give you an idea. So he rides up, he goes up to Taneytown with his staff. He moves his headquarters closer to where he's massing his forces. So this Pipe Creek Memorandum, he basically outlines engaging Lee at a place called Big Pipe Creek, which is in Carroll County, Maryland, as I said. And the reason he picked that is because it had been surveyed by engineers. And by the way, Meade was an engineer. And he felt like it was a very good defensive position, you know, to basically check the Confederates. But it was also, even though he wasn't massing his forces there, he felt like if there was what is called a general engagement, like meaning a big ass battle in Gettysburg, if things didn't go the way he wanted them to, Big Pipe Creek was a great place to retreat to and then make another stand. So that was kind of important from the command perspective on the 30th. The other thing that happened that day, there were a couple of battles, skirmishes. One was a skirmish up around present-day Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, where the Confederates that were trying to like get across the Susquehanna River into Harrisburg, the state capital of Pennsylvania, they were kind of repulsed in a skirmish, kind of a running skirmish with some Confederate or with some Union troops that had been sent there. The other thing that happened, and this would have a huge impact on the battle, I think, is that Jeb Stuart kind of got, you know, kind of got in a pickle in Hanover, Pennsylvania, where cavalry forces actually fought in the streets of Hanover, Pennsylvania. And, you know, this is coming on the heels of the Battle of Brandy Station, which was the largest cavalry engagement in the history of North America, at least that we know, right? Because I guess natives on horses could have amassed, you know, 50,000 braves on horses 800 years ago and done something we don't even know about. But in recorded history, right, Battle of Brandy Station. And during that battle, Stuart was surprised a couple of times by Union charges. He was kind of caught with his pants down. And what that battle did is it gave the Union Cavalry Corps under Alfred Pleasonton General Alfred Pleasonton, a lot of confidence, right? That they were able horsemen who could ride with the Confederates, and they weren't afraid of the Confederate cavalry, and that Stuart was just a mortal man, even though he had ridden around McClellan's army. But here's what also happens. Stuart kind of goes rogue. He doesn't really understand what Lee wanted him to accomplish, and instead of screening the army and keeping track of where the Army of the Potomac was, Stuart just kind of goes off. He like raids some wagon trains, he gets all this stuff, but it ends up slowing him down, and he has to keep moving farther east away from where he wants to go, right? Because he keeps running into Union forces. So at Hanover, again, he can't get down the Hanover Road towards Gettysburg. He has to tack to the east. Well, you know, a lot of times, you know, I've heard people say, oh, well, the South had better generals than the North. And I can tell you without a doubt that is false when you look at the Gettysburg campaign. Certainly Union generals, and we'll talk about this on July 2nd when we talk about Dan Sickles, certainly Union generals made some bonehead moves at Gettysburg, but they were way outdone by bonehead Confederate generals. And it comes into play in a big way, but the first bonehead was Jeb Stuart. So Stuart's not really doing what Lee needed him to do. And by the way, I don't know if you'll see this in any history books, but I have a theory that Robert E. Lee was suffering from congestive heart failure during the campaign, especially during certain parts of the Battle of Gettysburg. But that's a different aside. I don't have a ton of evidence, but some anecdotal evidence. Anyway, so also by this time, right, like Union cavalry under Brigadier General John Buford, who had one of 3 cavalry brigades in the Union cavalry. Buford's in Gettysburg, and there was a Brigadier General Pettigrew, who was a brigade commander in Major General Henry Heth's division, which was a part of Ambrose Powell Hill's Confederate Third Corps. And just a little background on the Confederate Third Corps: it was created after the death of Stonewall Jackson during the Chancellorsville battle. The Army of Northern Virginia only had 2 corps. The First Corps under James Longstreet, Lieutenant General James Longstreet, and the Second Corps under Lieutenant General Thomas J. Jackson, Stonewall Jackson. After Stonewall's killed, Lee divides the army up into 3 corps, which kind of was an insult to Longstreet, but whatever. He divides it up, and what he does is he puts Richard Ewell in charge of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia 2nd Corps. He puts Ambrose Powell Hill in charge of the 3rd Corps. So troops from Henry Heth's division, which was in the Confederate 3rd Corps, they decide, they're bivouacked around Cashtown, Pennsylvania on the 30th of June. They decide to go into town, into Gettysburg. And Gettysburg was, it's the county seat of Adams County. It was a significant crossroads. A lot of roads came in there from York, from Chambersburg, from Taneytown, like I said, from Harrisburg, from Emmitsburg, Maryland, and all those roads are still there today. They're still basically called the same things as they always were. And also rail lines ran through there, so it was an important crossroads town. And so the town already at this time had 2 institutions of higher learning. It had the Lutheran Theological Seminary, and Gettysburg College was there. And there were merchants and hotels and everything, right? And so anyway, the troops under Pettigrew, they are just going on a field trip, right? Pettigrew's like, yeah, let's go into town and, steal some shoes. That's basically what they wanted to do. Well, they come up the Chambersburg Pike from Cashtown, and at first they thought, well, they're like, ooh, that's some Union cavalry right there. And if the cavalry's there, the infantry might not be far behind, and it's just a brigade of us, so not a huge force. So what happens is Pettigrew's like, all right, guys, not today. Let's go back to Cashtown. He goes back to Cashtown. He reports to Heth and to Powell Hill that, hey, there's a Union cavalry, and it's not a small group. It's a sizable group of Union cavalry in Gettysburg. Heth and Powell Hill are like, nah, it's probably just some Pennsylvania militiamen, because Lincoln had tried to call up 100,000 militiamen, although I think they only got like 6,000 to answer the call. So they're like, yeah, it's just some militiamen. So that'll lead us up to what happens around 5 a.m. on July 1st, and you'll have to stay tuned for that. Okay, so some trucking stuff. If you follow LTL companies at all, I will be shocked if Yellow, YDR, I think they're also called, or Y, any Yellow, Yellow is. I'll be shocked if they don't go into bankruptcy today or sometime between now and next Friday. They filed a lawsuit against the Teamsters Union because the Teamsters basically won't cave in on some stuff that they want, which is they want to be able to use more drivers as hybrid workers, which is to say, take a guy that came in as a truck driver but put him on a dock. I can totally understand why anybody who is a truck driver would be opposed to that. I worked on a loading dock in an LTL company, and I mean, straight up, it sucks. So I can understand why drivers would be like, nah. Now, their market share has been falling. Their stock, their ticker symbol is YELL, Y-E-L-L, on the, I guess it's on the New York Stock Exchange, but their stock price is below $1 a share. It's in danger of being delisted. They have a lot of debt, and I just don't think that, they're going to be around very long. I'm sure somebody will buy them out. They have been shedding terminals and trying to consolidate. They had this kind of one Yellow, I think it was called, plan. But part of that plan is, getting these concessions from the union truck drivers, and I don't think that's going to happen. And candidly, I don't think it should. People will say, well, if you want to keep your job, if your job is a truck driver and you give concessions so that the job you keep means you work on a loading dock 4 days a week, did you really keep your job? I think those drivers who have long service with the company are going to find a place to go, because Yellow's customers are going to find a place to go. It's just that simple. So I don't think taking a hard line is the wrong thing to do. I think people got to look out for number one and, be mercenary, like I've said in the past. What else is going on in the trucking world? Too Simple. I've talked about them. They were this autonomous truck company. They were operating down in Texas. They've totally shut down U.S. operations, and they're going to focus on China. And so going back to, we were talking about like AI dash cams and stuff, and some people mentioned, autonomous trucks. If you're 30 years old, you might see autonomous trucks in some parts of the trucking industry. But I don't think that it's going to work even for the companies that have funding, have capital. Because, I read, there's a company, I can't remember the name, but they're basically like, yeah, we're forging ahead. We're gonna be, middle miles. That's their thing. Not first mile, not last mile, but middle miles. And then we're just gonna have drivers do the first part and the last part. Pick the truck up and drop the stuff off at the receiver. And I'm like, okay. But then what you're saying is instead of needing one driver for a load, you now need 2 drivers for a load. Now people say, oh, well, yeah, but it's only going to take a few minutes on each end. And my response to that is, these chuckleheads who've never driven a truck a day in their lives and have really no concept of what this industry is like, they're going to find out that truck that they put one driver for a few minutes on is waiting 9 hours to get loaded. And they're paying that driver the whole time, right? Because the compensation won't be by the mile. It won't be by the trip because they're only doing the first mile. It's going to be by the hour. And these guys are going to find out the hard way that when you got to pay a truck driver $30 an hour, which is about the going rate for, say, like an LTL pickup and delivery guy, $30 an hour, and you're like, oh, this should take him 45 minutes to go from shipper to the drop lot that we must build somewhere so we can transition the truck and the driver can get out and press the autopilot button, and then the truck can very soon afterwards get on to like an interstate because it's middle miles. They're going to find out the hard way that what they're thinking is, it sounds like a good idea, is not going to work in practice. But let them go at it. I'm just telling you, if you're worried at all about not self-driving, but autonomous trucks taking up that middle mileage, forget about it. It's not going to be a thing for a long time. There are just, because here's the thing, right? AI can learn things, but it has to learn from somebody. And I don't think these people have the people like you and I know not everybody is a trucker that watches my channel, but they don't have that, like I just said something that I don't think they've accounted for, right? Because they just sounded like all optimistic. They're telling all these investors, oh, we could totally do this. But there's a whole bunch of companies in this space that have gone bankrupt or had their stock delisted over the past few months. So, I'm not worried, and you shouldn't be either. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about what success, looks like. And, there's been a lot of people talking about training and about, 50,000 miles and trainers that want to make money. And the thing is, right, I think it's okay to, and in fact, I think it's essential that people recognize that just because you've been good at something else doesn't mean that you're going to be good at trucking. And when I say good at trucking, where everything's just going to fall into place, you're going to pass your CDL test in the minimum amount of time, yada yada, right? That's the first thing. The second thing that I want to mention is that even if you were unsuccessful in other endeavors, let's say the best you ever did, let's say you're 30 years old, the best you've had, you got 2 kids with 2 different people, you're not, maybe just, you haven't hit on all cylinders, right? You come into trucking, but you're like, hey, I'm a smart person and you don't need any education to come into trucking, etc. Well, that still doesn't mean you're going to be successful. And it still doesn't mean that there's not a steep learning curve, and that a lot of times learning lessons in trucking means actual money that you don't get. You know, it's like a lot of companies pay for people to learn, and you make mistakes. Like you work in a restaurant, you order the wrong food. I don't think the restaurant makes you pay for it. Maybe they do, but I know I worked in a grocery store, you know, part-time when I was in the Navy. Man, we would break stuff all the time. Actually, my manager was the worst. My assistant manager was the worst at it. He like totally wiped out an entire pallet of mayonnaise one time, and we refused to help him clean it up. We're like, no, we got stuff to do out here on the store floor. You can work in the back. True story. I was like, no, Gary, I'm not helping you. You freaking wrecked an entire pallet of mayonnaise because you weren't paying attention when you were trying to put it on the top racket in the storeroom. That's on you, buddy. But, you know, people make mistakes, and my manager, Gary, he didn't come out of pocket for any of that mayonnaise. And I'm not joking. He probably destroyed like $500 worth of mayonnaise. Because it was legit, like stacked up about 5 feet high pallet of mayonnaise. Just all of it. Jars of mayonnaise in cases. Did anybody say, hey, Gary, give us $500? No, it just comes with the business. But in this business, you know, maybe even if you're a company driver, but definitely if you're coming here and you're leasing or buying, it's going to cost you money when you make a mistake. Any mistake, you can count on it costing you money. You get a ticket, it's going to cost you money. You have an accident, it's going to cost you money. Even when the accident isn't your fault, it's going to cost you money. I paid, with my last truck, $2,000 over about a 2-year period just because deer couldn't stay on the side of the road and ran out in front of me. I had a trainee who was hit and ran at a truck stop, and they didn't have a dash cam, so they didn't know exactly who did it, and they were like dead asleep, and the person took off, and guess what? They didn't do a thing wrong, but Prime is still like, hey, thanks for the $1,000. I don't think they say it that way. They just send you a message and say, hey, we're taking $1,000 from you. So it's important to understand that just because you think, oh, I have a positive attitude, I'm a hard worker, you know, that you're going to come here and everything's going to be rainbows and butterflies. I mean, you know, bad things happen to good people. And the other thing too is that what you think, and this is a criticism. It's not a slam, but it is a criticism. What you think is hard work maybe really isn't hard work in the trucking industry. And I'm not saying this is a super hard job physically. I mean, come on, you see the people walking around truck stops. You don't even have to be able to do one push-up to do this job. But it takes some mental endurance and working up to driving night after night after night, if that's how the schedule works out. Different time zones, you know, just constant, you know, motion. That takes a while to build up to, and some people honestly never get used to it. And they can't, like some people can't even get through TNT because they can't handle sleeping while a vehicle's moving. Other people, it doesn't bother them. But what I'm saying is that all of the good attributes that you bring to this game or this war, or, you know, it's not a war, but you can get hurt or killed here. All of that is great, but it doesn't guarantee success. And sometimes, in some weeks, some months, you may feel snake bitten. And if you're not durable, both physically and mentally and emotionally, it can really get you down in a hurry and get you to the point where you want to throw the towel in. You know, like I took over a truck that had been on lease. Okay, the person who had it, because I read the report. Let's see, what are we at? Oh yeah, we're doing okay. I'll finish up here in a minute. The person who had it they trashed it. Now, I don't want to cast aspersions on, well, I do want to cast aspersions on somebody who trashes a piece of equipment, never cleans it, has dog, excrement and urine, all that. I mean, it was a horrible report, right? They should have been embarrassed. I'm sure they weren't, but they should have been. It may say something about their work ethic, their attention to detail, their willingness to do something that's unpleasant. And that may be the reason that they didn't finish their lease. Could be a million other reasons, but they clearly, and then leaving that kind of mess for somebody else to clean up, even though that person that cleaned it up is getting paid. I'm not sure if this person is still in trucking, but I know that they weren't successful at Prime. And I feel like people sometimes bring characteristics that they're going to have to overcome, and they bring characteristics that are useful but have to be molded, have to be malleable. You might say, oh, I'm a hard worker, but if you're only a hard worker from 9 to 5, that's not going to be good enough, right? If you're the person that showed up at in the morning, worked till 5 o'clock and worked really hard and then went home, that's not going to be enough some days. And so you got to be honest with yourself, and you got to be willing to understand that not every day is successful, not every week is successful, not every month is. But there is help, right? Like, people reach out to me, and I'm not saying I'm the only resource. There's tons of resources. There's resources in the company, and your fleet manager, like I heard one of those safety guys call a fleet manager your business partner. No, but your success does put money in the pocket of your fleet manager. When a fleet manager is fat, dumb, and happy and making lots of money from other people, maybe he doesn't help you enough. That's a bad investment, or that's a lack of a good investment on his part, and so that's short-sighted. But there is help out there. So remember, success here, it may not look like success did at other places. And all the things that you did to be successful other places in other endeavors may not work here, or may not work as completely as you would hope. But if you keep at it, my experience is that things will eventually turn around, and you'll get to where you want to be. So anyway, happy June 30th to everybody. I'm going to try to do videos every day this weekend and Monday, talking about the Battle of Gettysburg. We'll also talk on the 4th, because I'll still be on the road until next week, Friday. Then I'm going to be home for a bit. We'll talk about the Siege of Vicksburg, finally compelling the surrender of Pemberton's troops at Vicksburg to Ulysses S. Grant. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.